a small, upscale restaurant named Le Dîner Étoilé stood as a beacon of class and elegance in one of the city's most prestigious neighborhoods. Its owner, Gregory Palmer, prided himself on creating an atmosphere of exclusivity and refinement. For Gregory, maintaining the restaurant's image was not just about business. It was a matter of personal pride. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his gray hair neatly combed back, Gregory watched over his restaurant with a sharp eye, ensuring that only a specific type of clientele entered his establishment. Lawyers, politicians, celebrities, and the city's wealthiest regularly visited Le Dîner Étoilé, appreciating the privacy and luxury that Gregory had carefully curated over the years. One evening, as Gregory stood at his usual post by the entrance, he noticed a couple approaching. They were well-dressed. The man, Robert, wore a sleek black suit, and his wife, Lila, dazzled in an elegant blue gown that shimmered under the streetlights. As they drew closer, Gregory's eyes narrowed. Robert and Lila were black, and despite their impeccable appearance, he felt an immediate sense of discomfort. He maintained a polished smile, hiding his true thoughts, but inside, a wave of judgment washed over him. He wondered if they had somehow bypassed his strict reservation system. "Good evening," Gregory said, his voice smooth but insincere. "Do you have a reservation with us tonight?" Robert nodded confidently. "Yes, it's under the name Johnson." Gregory glanced at his maître d', who quickly checked the list and confirmed that their reservation was indeed valid. Although everything was in order, Gregory felt a pang of annoyance. With a tight smile, he led them inside, but deliberately placed them at a small table near the kitchen door, far from the center of the dining room where the more prestigious guests were seated. This was his subtle way of sending a message. As Robert and Lila settled into their seats, they exchanged a glance, sensing the hostility in the air but choosing not to react. Gregory returned to his post at the entrance, his mind swirling with thoughts. The couple's presence, in his eyes, disrupted the exclusive image he had so carefully crafted. He believed that Le Dîner Étoilé was meant for a certain type of person, and in his mind, Robert and Lila didn't fit that image. Despite his internal struggle, Gregory maintained his professional demeanor, greeting other guests and overseeing the evening's service. But his eyes frequently flicked back to the table where Robert and Lila sat, watching for any behavior that would justify his discomfort. Meanwhile, the couple remained composed, chatting quietly and enjoying their evening. For Robert and Lila, this night was supposed to be special. They were celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary and had chosen Le Dîner Étoilé for its reputation as the finest restaurant in the city. They had worked hard to reach this point in their lives and wanted to mark the occasion in a place that symbolized their success. As they sat, they noticed Gregory's pointed glances and felt the stares from some of the other patrons. But instead of letting it ruin their night, they decided to rise above the subtle discrimination, holding hands across the table and smiling at one another. Their composure only seemed to irritate Gregory further. Determined to make them feel unwelcome, he instructed his staff to delay their food service. Minutes turned into half an hour, and while the other tables were promptly served, Robert and Lila's table remained empty. Lila noticed the delay and whispered to Robert, who gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Let's not let this ruin our night," he said softly. "We've faced worse before." But Gregory's actions were far from unnoticed. A few of the younger waiters exchanged nervous glances, sensing the tension between their boss and the couple. One of them, Emily, couldn't help but feel uneasy. She had worked at Le Dîner Étoilé for a year and had seen Gregory make similar judgments before, though this time felt different, more personal, more deliberate. Eventually, Emily approached the couple's table, apologizing for the delay. She could feel the weight of their eyes, the quiet grace they exuded despite the poor treatment. "I'm so sorry for the wait," she said, her voice sincere. "Your meals will be out shortly." Robert smiled warmly. "Thank you, Emily. We appreciate it." Gregory, watching from a distance, felt his irritation peak. His attempt to unsettle them had failed. He leaned toward his maître and whispered, "Check their reservation again. Make sure it's legitimate." His tone left no room for questions. The maître d', knowing Gregory's mood, hesitated briefly but nodded, complying with the request. Moments later he returned, confirming that the reservation was indeed valid. Gregory clenched his jaw. He had been hoping for an excuse, any excuse, to confront them and have them removed, but with no valid reason he was forced to endure their presence. Finally, Gregory decided to take matters into his own hands. He walked over to their table, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I trust everything is to your satisfaction," he asked, though his tone suggested otherwise. Robert looked up, his eyes calm but unyielding. "It's been a lovely evening so far. Thank you for checking in." Lila added, "Yes, we're just enjoying our night together." The ease with which they responded only deepened Gregory's frustration. He decided to push further. "I noticed there was some confusion with your reservation earlier," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's rare that we receive reservations from guests who are unfamiliar with our establishment." Lila's eyes narrowed, but her smile remained. "We've heard wonderful things about this place. We thought it would be perfect for our anniversary." Gregory's smile faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Ah, an anniversary. How nice," he said. "Though I must admit, it's surprising you chose le dîner étoilé. We cater to a very specific clientele." Robert's expression didn't change, but there was a slight edge to his voice when he replied, "And what kind of clientele would that be, Mr. Palmer?" Gregory hesitated, sensing that he was being tested. But he was too proud to back down. "Our guests appreciate a certain level of refinement," he said. "They expect a particular atmosphere, one that I'm not sure everyone understands." Robert and Lila exchanged a look, fully understanding the implication. But instead of reacting with anger, Robert simply leaned back in his chair. "We made our reservation through the usual process, just like anyone else. If that's not enough, then perhaps the problem isn't with us." Gregory felt his temper flare. "I must insist that we maintain our standards here," he said, his voice growing colder. "If you feel uncomfortable, I can arrange for you to dine elsewhere." Lila, with grace and calmness, responded, "We understand the nature of your establishment, Mr. Palmer. That's precisely why we chose to dine here." Her tone was polite but firm, leaving Gregory with no ground to stand on. Unable to intimidate them as he had hoped, Gregory's frustration turned into a quiet rage. "I think it's best if you leave," he said, his voice laced with finality. "We have standards to uphold, and I don't believe this is the right place for you." For a moment, Robert and Lila sat in silence, absorbing his words. Then, with a calm resolve, Robert stood, pulling out Lila's chair. They gathered their belongings, refusing to show any sign of defeat. As they walked toward the exit, Robert turned back to Gregory, his eyes sharp. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Palmer. But remember, people will always reveal who they truly are." Lila nodded, her voice steady. "Have a good evening." As they walked out, the restaurant fell silent. The patrons, who had been watching the confrontation with bated breath, quickly returned to their meals, pretending they hadn't noticed. But the tension hung in the air like a thick fog. Gregory returned to his post, trying to regain his composure, but inside he felt a flicker of doubt. Had he gone too far? Yet, his pride told him he had done what was necessary to protect his restaurant's image. Little did he know that this night would change everything. The next morning, Gregory received an unexpected letter. It was from a prestigious law firm, and the contents left him stunned. A wealthy investor had expressed interest in buying le dîner étoilé, and the offer was more than generous, enough to retire comfortably. Intrigued but cautious, Gregory arranged a meeting to learn more. The following day, he arrived at the firm's sleek office building, expecting to meet a well-known entrepreneur or a business mogul. But when the conference room doors opened, Gregory's face went pale. Seated at the table, dressed in impeccable business attire, were none other than Robert and Lila Johnson. Gregory stood frozen, the color draining from his face as he tried to comprehend what he was seeing. The same couple he had thrown out of his restaurant, the same people he had deemed unworthy of le dîner étoilé, were sitting before him, looking every bit the high-powered business figures he had imagined his buyer would be. For a moment, he struggled to maintain his composure, his mind racing to find an explanation. "Mr. Palmer," Robert greeted, his voice professional and calm. "Thank you for coming. We appreciate your time." Gregory forced a smile, but it felt strained, almost painful. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," he stammered. I wasn't expecting you. Lila's eyes held a hint of amusement, though her expression remained poised. Please, have a seat. We have a lot to discuss. Gregory moved mechanically, his body operating on autopilot while his mind reeled from the shock. How had he misjudged them so completely? And more importantly, what did they want with his restaurant? As he sat down, he noticed the room was filled with lawyers and financial advisors, all focused intently on Robert and Lila. They commanded the room effortlessly, exuding a confidence and authority that made Gregory feel small, smaller than he had felt in years. For a few moments, the silence was palpable, charged with unspoken tension. Then Robert began, "You must be wondering why we're here, and why we are interested in acquiring your restaurant." His tone was calm but carried an underlying firmness that left no room for doubt. Gregory nodded, still trying to regain control of the situation. "Yes, I must admit I'm surprised. After our last interaction, I didn't think you would be interested." Lila exchanged a glance with Robert, and for a brief moment, a flicker of emotion passed between them. Then she turned to Gregory, her voice steady, but with an edge of steel. "We are entrepreneurs, Mr. Palmer. We've built a significant portfolio in the hospitality industry, and we've had our eye on Le Dîner Étoilé for quite some time. When we dined at your restaurant, it wasn't just for our anniversary, we were evaluating it as a potential acquisition." Gregory felt as if the ground had fallen out from beneath him. His worst fears were being confirmed, but in a way he had never expected. They had been assessing his restaurant all along, and he hadn't just failed their test. He had practically handed them the ammunition they needed to take everything from him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Robert continued, his voice smooth and controlled. "Our experience that evening confirmed our suspicions. While Le Dîner Étoilé has the potential to be a valuable asset, it is currently suffering from a perspective problem." He paused, his eyes locking onto Gregory's. "And that's why we're here, to offer you a way out." Gregory's heart sank as he felt the full weight of his arrogance crashing down on him. "A way out?" he repeated, struggling to maintain his composure. "What do you mean?" Lila leaned forward, folding her hands on the table. "We're prepared to purchase the restaurant for a generous sum well above market value, but there are conditions." The word conditions sent a chill down Gregory's spine. He had been in enough business deals to know that conditions often came with strings attached. He forced himself to stay calm. "What conditions?" Robert's expression remained neutral as he outlined their terms. "First, the sale must be finalized immediately. We don't want a long, drawn-out process. We have the resources to move quickly, and we expect the same from you." Gregory nodded, trying to mask the unease building in his chest. "That's reasonable." Lila then spoke, her tone firm but polite. "Secondly, you will step away from the business entirely. No interviews, no public statements. You will quietly exit once the deal is done." Gregory's eyes widened. The idea of walking away from the restaurant he had poured his life into felt like a blow to his very identity. "You want me to just disappear?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lila's expression softened, but her resolve didn't waver. "Yes, Mr. Palmer. We believe it's best for both parties." Before Gregory could protest, Robert added the final condition, and it was the hardest blow yet. "Lastly, you will agree not to open any similar establishment ever again. If you do, we will pursue legal action." The room fell silent as Gregory absorbed their words. The conditions felt like a noose tightening around his neck. They weren't just buying his restaurant, they were erasing his legacy. The restaurant was his pride and joy, the culmination of years of hard work, and the idea of relinquishing it entirely, without any acknowledgement or control, felt unbearable. "Why these conditions?" he demanded, his voice rising slightly as anger and desperation bubbled up. "Why do you want me out so completely?" Robert's gaze hardened, and for the first time, a hint of the emotions he had held back surfaced. "Because we believe in integrity, Mr. Palmer, and your behavior the other night showed us exactly who you are. We have no interest in being associated with someone who holds those views." Lila added, her voice soft but unyielding, "We're offering you a very profitable way out, but make no mistake, this is the only way forward for you." Gregory felt his chest tighten. His pride, the very thing that had fueled his success for so long, was now his downfall. He had built his restaurant on the image of exclusivity, but he had also built it on prejudice. The very attitude that had once brought him wealth and status was now costing him everything. He wanted to argue, to fight back. But deep down, he knew they had him cornered. "And if I refuse?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Lila's eyes flashed with determination. "If you refuse, we will walk away from this deal, and we will make sure the world knows exactly how you treated us. Your clients, your investors, the media, they will all hear about your actions. In today's world, Mr. Palmer, that kind of news spreads quickly." The words hit Gregory like a punch to the gut. He knew she was right. A scandal of that magnitude would ruin him. Investors would pull out, clients would shun him, and the restaurant's reputation, his reputation, would be destroyed. The future he had worked so hard to build would crumble before his eyes. He tried to swallow the lump in his throat as the reality of his situation settled over him like a heavy cloud. He was trapped, and there was no way out. With great reluctance, Gregory nodded. "Fine," he said, his voice hollow. "I agree to your terms." Robert and Lila exchanged a glance, a silent confirmation that they had won. "Excellent," Robert said, his tone professional. "Our lawyers will finalize the paperwork, and we'll proceed with the sale." As the meeting continued, Gregory felt himself growing increasingly detached. The lawyers discussed the details of the transaction, their voices a distant hum. He knew he should be paying attention, but all he could think about was the night he had turned Robert and Lila away. If he had treated them with respect, if he had seen them for the successful and intelligent people they were, none of this would be happening. The irony was almost too much to bear. He had judged them based on their appearance, and now they were the ones taking everything from him. When the meeting finally ended, Robert extended his hand to Gregory. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Palmer. We'll make sure the transition is smooth." Gregory shook his hand, his grip firm but his heart heavy. "I'm sure you will," he said, forcing a tight smile. Lila nodded, offering him a polite but distant smile. "We look forward to continuing the legacy you've built." Gregory's stomach twisted at the words. They meant it as a gesture of goodwill, but to him, it felt like a reminder of everything he was losing. He nodded once more before leaving the room, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. As he exited the sleek office building and stepped onto the bustling city streets, the wind bit at his skin, a sharp reminder of the cold reality he now faced. The restaurant he had once controlled, the life he had meticulously built, it was all slipping away. The world continued moving around him, indifferent to his plight, as he walked back to Le Dîner Étoilé for what might be the last time. Inside his restaurant, Gregory found solace in the familiar sights and sounds, the clinking of glasses, the soft glow of chandeliers, the murmur of conversations. But this time the sense of pride he once felt was replaced by a hollow ache. He retreated to his office, closing the door behind him, and sat in silence. He stared at the framed photographs on the walls, pictures of him with celebrities, politicians, and business magnates who had dined at Le Dîner Étoilé. He had always believed that these moments defined him, that the success of his restaurant proved he was a man of distinction. But now, as he looked at them, he saw them for what they truly were. Symbols of a life built on exclusion and arrogance. Gregory's phone buzzed on his desk, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from one of his oldest friends and investors, Charles, urging him to finalize the deal and not miss this golden opportunity. The words stung. To them, this was just business, a chance to cash out at the peak. But to Gregory, it was so much more. It was his life, his identity, his legacy, everything he had ever worked for. Gregory's hands trembled as he set down the phone. He knew he had no choice but to follow through with the sale. But the thought of walking away, of surrendering everything he had built, felt like a defeat too great to bear. He had prided himself on being a man of principle, a man who upheld standards. But now he realized those principles were rooted in prejudice, and those standards had cost him everything. Days after the meeting, Gregory found himself a shadow of the confident businessman he once was. The finalization of the deal loomed closer, and as each day passed, he felt a piece of his identity slipping further away. The restaurant that had once been his pride, the very symbol of his success, now felt like a cage. His every move inside the place he used to own and command was weighed down by the knowledge that soon it wouldn't be his anymore. On the surface, he maintained his professionalism, greeting customers and overseeing the service like he always had. But underneath, he was a storm of emotions. At night, he sat alone in his office, staring at the contracts and legal documents that would finalize the transfer of his restaurant. The pen he held felt like 100-pound weight. Every time he tried to sign, he hesitated, as if he could somehow reverse everything with one swift move. One evening, as he was about to close up, Gregory was interrupted by a knock at his office door. It was Emily, the young waitress who had witnessed his mistreatment of Robert and Lila. She had always been a hard-working and quiet employee, but tonight there was a resolve in her eyes that Gregory hadn't seen before. "Mr. Palmer," she began hesitantly, "I know it's not my place, but can I speak to you for a moment?" Gregory sighed, nodding as he leaned back in his chair. "Go ahead, Emily. What is it?" Emily took a deep breath, her hands fidgeting nervously. "I've worked here for a while now, and I've always admired the way you've run this place. But what happened with that couple the other night, it wasn't right. And I know it's not my business, but—" She paused, her eyes searching his for a hint of understanding. People notice these things. Gregory's expression tightened, and for a moment, anger flared in his eyes. "Emily, if you think I need a lecture on how to run my business—" She held up a hand, cutting him off gently but firmly. "That's not what I'm saying. I just think you're better than this. Or at least I thought you were." The words hit Gregory harder than he expected. There was no accusation in her tone, just a genuine sadness, as if she were speaking to someone she once respected, but no longer recognized. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words felt hollow. Deep down, he knew she was right. He had built this place not just to showcase his culinary prowess, but to create an atmosphere of class and sophistication. At least, that's what he had always told himself. But somewhere along the way, that pursuit had twisted into something ugly. He forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I appreciate your concern, Emily, but the restaurant business, it's complicated. We have to maintain a certain standard." Emily's gaze softened, but there was a quiet determination there. Standards are important, yes, but so is treating people with respect. She paused, letting her words sink in. Sometimes the things we think set us apart are the very things that bring us down. Gregory was silent for a moment, her words echoing in his mind long after she left the room. He leaned back in his chair, feeling a hollowness he hadn't felt before. For so long, he had convinced himself that his vision of exclusivity was what made Le Dîner Étoilé special. But now, confronted with his own actions and the consequences that followed, he wasn't so sure. The night of the final signing arrived. Gregory stood in the conference room, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. Across from him, Robert and Lila sat with their legal team, their expressions professional yet calm. The lawyers laid out the documents, and Gregory could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it, the end of everything he had built. Just as he was about to sign, a voice in his head screamed at him to stop. Was he really going to let everything he had worked for slip away? Was he going to let pride, the very thing he had prided himself on, be his undoing? With the pen poised above the paper, he paused. "I have a question," he said, his voice breaking the silence. Robert and Lila exchanged a glance before nodding. "Go ahead," Robert replied, his tone even. Gregory swallowed, his throat dry. "Why do you want this restaurant so badly? I understand the business value, but why go through all this trouble?" For the first time, Lila's expression softened. She looked at Gregory, and there was no triumph in her eyes, only honesty. "We love this restaurant, Mr. Palmer. Years ago, when we first moved to the city, we saved up for months just to dine here. It was a dream for us, a place where we felt like we could be part of something special. But that feeling didn't last." Robert picked up where Lila left off. "We realized that despite all the glamour, the exclusivity, and the elegance, there was an undercurrent. A message that some people didn't belong, no matter how much they tried to fit in." Lila nodded, her voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "We wanted to change that. We saw the potential in this place, the potential it had to be inclusive while still maintaining its beauty. So when the opportunity arose, we knew we had to take it." Gregory was silent, the depth of their words sinking in. He had spent years building a fortress of exclusivity, believing it was the key to his success. But he had never considered that it might have been pushing away people who had the potential to enrich the restaurant even further. His hand shook as he stared at the contract. "You're taking something that's been my life's work," he said quietly, almost to himself, "and turning it into something I never envisioned." Lila's eyes softened. "We're not trying to take it from you, Mr. Palmer. We're trying to build on what you've created, to make it something that welcomes everyone while still celebrating its roots." Gregory felt a lump rise in his throat. For years, he had clung to his vision, refusing to see the flaws in it. Now, faced with the truth, he felt both humbled and ashamed. He nodded, finally understanding that he had been his own worst enemy. "You're right," he admitted, the words heavy with regret. "I let my pride blind me." Robert offered a small smile, one that felt genuine. "It takes courage to admit that, Mr. Palmer." With a deep breath, Gregory signed the papers, each stroke of the pen feeling like a step into an uncertain future. The moment the ink dried, he felt an overwhelming sense of both loss and relief. It was done. The restaurant was no longer his. As the meeting concluded, Gregory stood, feeling the weight of the past lift off his shoulders. He extended his hand to Robert and Lila. "I wish you both the best. I hope you turn this place into something great." Lila smiled warmly, shaking his hand. "We will. And thank you." With that, Gregory left the conference room, stepping out into the cold night air. The wind felt different this time, biting, but also freeing. For the first time in years, he didn't have the weight of the restaurant holding him down. A week later, Gregory found himself outside Le Dîner Étoilé, watching from across the street. The new signage, under Robert and Lila's ownership, read Le Dîner Nouveau, a fresh start. The place looked different, but there was a warmth emanating from it that he hadn't seen before. He watched as a diverse crowd entered, some in elegant dresses, others in casual attire, all greeted with the same warmth by the staff. Gregory felt a pang of bittersweet pride. They had done it. They had transformed the restaurant into something more meaningful, something he had never managed to achieve. But just as he was about to turn away, he noticed Emily waving at him from the doorway. "Mr. Palmer," she called out, a bright smile on her face. "Care to join us for dinner?" Gregory hesitated, caught off guard. "I don't think that would be appropriate." "Come on," she insisted, laughing lightly. "We still have a table for you. It's your restaurant, after all." He paused, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, he realized he wasn't just an outsider. Maybe there was still a place for him in this new version of the restaurant, a place where he could start over, free of the pride that had once defined him. With a deep breath, he crossed the street and walked through the doors of the restaurant that was no longer his, but somehow felt more welcoming than it ever had. Gregory hesitated at the entrance of Le Dîner Nouveau, feeling the warm glow of the restaurant wash over him. The air carried the rich scent of spices and fresh bread, a blend of flavors that was both familiar and new. It was an invitation, a promise of something different, something that had changed for the better. As he stepped inside, he was greeted not as the owner he once was, but as a guest. The staff, some familiar faces from his time and some new, welcomed him with genuine smiles. Emily led him to a cozy corner table near the window, a spot that offered a view of the bustling kitchen, a place he had always reserved for his most valued guests. Now he was on the other side of the experience, and it felt both humbling and comforting. "So how does it feel?" Emily asked as she set down a glass of red wine, her eyes twinkling with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Gregory let out a small chuckle, swirling the wine as he looked around the room. "It feels different," he admitted, "but in a good way. You've all done a wonderful job. It feels alive." Emily beamed. "Thank you. Robert and Lila have been amazing to work with. They've made this place feel like home, for everyone." There was a sincerity in her words that struck Gregory deeply. It was a feeling he had chased for years without ever truly grasping. He had built his restaurant as a fortress of exclusivity, believing that the only way to achieve greatness was by keeping it closed off. But sitting there, surrounded by the vibrant energy of the new restaurant, he finally understood what had been missing all along. As he sipped his wine, he couldn't help but glance toward the center of the dining room, where Robert and Lila were moving from table to table, greeting guests. They were effortless hosts, making each person feel valued and welcome. Their presence brought a warmth that had never existed in the old restaurant, and Gregory saw for the first time why they were able to turn his former establishment into something even greater. Then, to his surprise, Robert caught his eye and smiled. Gregory felt a jolt of nervousness as Robert and Lila made their way over to his table. "Mr. Palmer, it's good to see you again," Robert greeted warmly. "Thank you for joining us tonight." Lila nodded in agreement. "We're glad you came. It's not every day we get to host the man who started it all." Gregory felt his chest tighten. Their graciousness, despite everything, was unexpected. "I have to admit, I wasn't sure if I'd be welcome here," he said honestly, his voice carrying a hint of vulnerability he rarely showed. Lila shook her head. "Of course you're welcome. This place is as much a part of your story as it is ours. Without what you built, we wouldn't be standing here." Gregory was silent for a moment, feeling a mix of gratitude and regret. "I didn't expect you to say that, especially after the way I treated you." Robert smiled, and there was no bitterness in his eyes, only understanding. "Everyone makes mistakes, Mr. Palmer. What matters is what we do after we realize them." Gregory's eyes softened. "Call me Greg," he said, a small genuine smile appearing on his face for the first time in a long while. Just as they were about to continue the conversation, the lights dimmed slightly, and a small group of musicians began playing a soft jazz tune. The atmosphere in the restaurant transformed, becoming even more intimate and warm. The guests swayed gently to the rhythm, and Gregory watched as couples leaned in closer, their laughter mingling with the melodies. Emily returned to the table, holding a plate with a silver dome cover. "Chef insisted you try one of our new dishes, Greg. It's a tribute to the original menu, but with a twist." As she lifted the cover, the aroma of seared duck and caramelized onions filled the air. The presentation was stunning, artistic, yet inviting. Gregory's eyes widened, and for a moment he was transported back to the days when he would spend hours perfecting dishes in the kitchen, ensuring they were nothing short of masterpieces. He took a bite, savoring the flavors that danced on his tongue. It was familiar, yet distinctly different, a nod to the past, but with a fresh perspective. "This is incredible," he said, genuinely impressed. "Better than anything I ever did." Robert laughed. "We kept some of your old recipes but added our own touches. We thought it was important to honor what you started." Gregory felt a lump rise in his throat. He had expected to feel bitterness or resentment when he saw the restaurant flourishing without him, but instead, all he felt was gratitude. "I'm glad you did. It's more than I could have hoped for." As the evening continued, Gregory found himself immersed in the lively atmosphere of the restaurant. He watched as people from different walks of life came together, sharing stories, laughing, and enjoying the food. It was a sight that filled him with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. At one point, Emily joined him again, this time carrying a small envelope. "Greg, Robert and Lila wanted me to give this to you." Curious, Gregory opened the envelope to find an invitation. It was beautifully designed, with Le Dîner Nouveau's logo embossed in gold. It read, "You are cordially invited to be our guest of honor for the restaurant's official reopening celebration next weekend. We want to celebrate not only the new chapter we're creating, but also the legacy that started it all." Gregory felt a mix of emotions welling up inside him. He had spent so long believing that he was above others, that his success placed him on a pedestal. Yet here he was, invited to be part of a celebration he never thought he would be included in. He looked up at Emily, who was smiling warmly. "They didn't have to do this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Emily shrugged playfully. "They wanted you to know that, despite everything, this place is still your legacy too. It's just grown beyond what it was." As he folded the invitation, Gregory felt a wave of gratitude he hadn't expected. For years, he had fought to preserve his vision of perfection, only to find that the true beauty of what he had built lay in its evolution. The restaurant was more alive than it had ever been, and while he no longer owned it, he felt connected to it in a new, more meaningful way. He stood up, taking one last look around the room before leaving. "I'll be there," he promised Emily, feeling lighter than he had in years. "And thank you, Emily, for everything." As Gregory walked out into the crisp night air, he couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. The restaurant that had once been a source of pride and eventually regret had transformed into a place of community and warmth. And even though he wasn't the owner anymore, he was still a part of its story. A week later, the grand reopening of Le Nouveau arrived. The restaurant was filled to the brim with guests, and the energy was electric. Robert and Leila had spared no detail, making the event feel like a celebration of not just food, but of connection, inclusivity, and second chances. Gregory arrived in a simple but elegant suit, feeling a sense of excitement he hadn't felt in years. As he entered, he was greeted by applause, friends, former colleagues, and even loyal customers who remembered him from the old days. He felt his eyes sting as he smiled and waved. At the center of the room stood a large photograph, a portrait of the old Le Dîner Étoilé, a reminder of the journey the restaurant had taken. And beside it was a plaque that read, "In honor of Greg Palmer, whose passion and vision laid the foundation for what we are today. May this restaurant continue to be a place where all are welcomed, cherished, and celebrated." Gregory felt his heart swell with emotion as he read the inscription. He had spent so many years focused on exclusivity, believing that it was the key to creating something special. But standing there, surrounded by warmth and acceptance, he realized that the greatest legacy he could leave was one of openness, growth, and community. As the evening unfolded, Gregory found himself at the center of conversations, sharing stories of the old days while embracing the new spirit of the restaurant. He felt lighter, freer, and happier than he had in years. Later that night, as the music played and the laughter filled the air, Gregory took a moment to step outside, standing under the twinkling lights that lined the street. He watched through the windows as Robert and Leila continued hosting, their smiles genuine, their energy infectious. He knew the restaurant was in the right hands. He felt a sense of peace wash over him, a feeling that no amount of success or exclusivity could ever provide. It was the peace of knowing that he had found his place in a world that had moved forward, and he was ready to move forward with it. And for the first time, Gregory realized that he didn't have to be the owner of something to belong to it. Sometimes being part of a story, being able to witness its growth and transformation, was more than enough. As he turned to head back inside, he smiled, feeling the night breeze against his face. The story of Le Dîner Nouveau was far from over, and he was grateful to be a part of it, wherever it led. As Gregory stepped back inside the lively atmosphere of Le Dîner Nouveau, he felt a renewed sense of belonging. The laughter of guests mingled with the soft strains of music, creating an ambiance that was both inviting and comforting. The air was filled with the scent of culinary delights, each dish meticulously prepared with a touch of elegance and warmth. He found himself gravitating toward the kitchen, drawn to the energy that buzzed behind the scenes. The kitchen was a whirlwind of motion, with chefs expertly crafting dishes and waitstaff weaving through the space with practiced grace. Gregory watched from the doorway, feeling a twinge of nostalgia. This was where he had once thrived, where his love for food and perfection had flourished. Yet now there was something different, something that felt more alive, more vibrant than ever before. Just as he was about to leave the doorway, one of the chefs, a young man named Miguel, who had been an apprentice under Gregory years ago, caught sight of him. Miguel's face lit up with a wide grin, and he called out, "Hey, Chef Palmer, or should I say, Greg?" Gregory chuckled, surprised but pleased to be recognized. "Miguel, it's been a long time. Looks like you've really made your mark here." Miguel wiped his hands on his apron and walked over, his eyes filled with admiration. "I learned from the best, remember?" he said with a wink. "And I have to say, it's an honor to be cooking in this kitchen again, especially knowing the legacy you left behind." Gregory felt a swell of pride but also humility. "Well, it seems like you all have taken what I started and elevated it to something extraordinary. I'm impressed." Miguel's eyes twinkled with enthusiasm. "We're building on what you created, Greg. You taught us the art of perfection, but Robert and Leila showed us how to add soul to it. It's a balance I think you'd appreciate." Gregory nodded, taking in the words. He was beginning to see that this place, his place, had grown into something that was greater than the sum of its parts. "I do appreciate it, Miguel. More than you know." Before he could say more, the kitchen door swung open, and Robert and Lila walked in, their faces lighting up when they saw Gregory speaking with the staff. "There you are," Lila exclaimed. "We were wondering where our guest of honor had wandered off to." Gregory smiled sheepishly. "I couldn't resist seeing the magic happening behind the scenes." Robert grinned. "Well, we're glad you did. In fact, we were hoping you'd do us a favor tonight." Gregory's brow furrowed in curiosity. "A favor?" Lila nodded, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "We'd like you to help us with the final course. We've designed a new dessert that we think embodies the spirit of Le Dîner Nouveau, and we'd be honored if you would join us in preparing it." Gregory felt his heart skip a beat. It had been years since he had cooked professionally, and the thought of stepping back into that role, even for a moment, filled him with both excitement and nervousness. "Are you sure? I might be a little rusty." Robert laughed. "We're sure you've still got it, Greg. Besides, we think it'd be fitting. A sort of passing of the torch." With a nod, Gregory slipped on an apron. The familiar feel of the kitchen, the warmth of the stove, the chatter of chefs, the precision of every movement, rushed back to him like an old friend. Robert, Lila, and Gregory worked together, carefully crafting a dessert that blended classic French technique with a modern twist. The dish, a delicate lavender soufflé topped with a hint of citrus glaze, was both fragrant and light, a perfect metaphor for the restaurant's transformation. As they plated the dessert, Gregory felt a rush of adrenaline. For so long he had believed that perfection was the ultimate goal. Yet tonight, as he cooked alongside Robert and Lila, he realized that it was the imperfections, the unexpected moments, that made life and food truly meaningful. Once the desserts were ready, they brought the plates out to the dining room, and Gregory felt a swell of pride as the guests marveled at the presentation. He moved from table to table with Robert and Lila, sharing stories about the dish and connecting with patrons in a way he had never done before. This was different from the distant, almost aloof manner he used to maintain. Now he felt himself opening up, enjoying the connections he was making. As the night wore on, Gregory found himself laughing, sharing memories of the early days of Le Dîner Étoilé, and listening as guests shared their own stories of dining there, both before and after the transformation. The atmosphere was filled with warmth and joy, a celebration not just of a restaurant, but of the people who made it special. At one point, an older couple approached Gregory, their eyes twinkling with nostalgia. "We've been coming here for over a decade," the man said, gripping Gregory's hand. "And tonight, it feels better than ever. You should be proud." Gregory felt a wave of emotion. "Thank you. That means more to me than you know." As the evening drew to a close, Robert and Lila raised their glasses to propose a toast. "To Greg Palmer," Robert began, "whose vision built the foundation of this incredible place. Tonight, we honor not just the restaurant's past but its future, and we are grateful to have him here as part of this new chapter." The guests applauded, and Gregory felt his face flush with emotion. He lifted his own glass, his voice steady but full of gratitude. "Thank you, everyone. I may not have always gotten it right, but seeing what Le Dîner Nouveau has become, I couldn't be more proud of where we are now." The crowd cheered, and Gregory felt a lightness he hadn't felt in years. He had come full circle, from being the proud and exclusive owner of an elite restaurant to being a guest who had learned to embrace change, humility, and connection. After the toast, as guests slowly began to leave and the staff cleaned up, Gregory found himself standing by the bar, watching the last few stragglers bid their goodbyes. Emily approached, her expression warm. "So what do you think? Was tonight everything you hoped it would be?" Gregory smiled, his eyes glistening with gratitude. "It was more than I could have ever imagined. Thank you for being here through all of it." Emily laughed, nudging his shoulder playfully. "Hey, you're part of the family now. You don't get to leave us so easily." Gregory's heart swelled at the words. Family. It was a concept he had pushed away for so long, too caught up in his pursuit of perfection. But now he saw that it was precisely what had been missing all along. Just as he was about to respond, a young girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, ran up to Gregory, her eyes wide with excitement. "Are you the chef who made the soufflé?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Gregory knelt down, smiling at the little girl. "I helped make it. Yes, did you like it?" She nodded enthusiastically. "It was the best thing I ever tasted. My mom says it tasted like happiness." Gregory's eyes softened as he felt a warmth spread through him. "Well, I'm glad it made you happy." The girl beamed at him, then ran off to join her family, leaving Gregory standing there with a smile on his face. It was a simple moment, but one that felt profound. He had spent so many years chasing after validation from critics and elite guests, yet this small moment of joy from a child was worth more than any praise he had ever received. As the last of the guests departed and the restaurant emptied out, Gregory stayed behind, helping the staff clean up. Robert and Lila, noticing his dedication, exchanged a look before walking over. "Greg," Lila began with a smile, "we've been thinking. We know you don't own the place anymore, but we'd love for you to stay involved. Maybe you could host special events or teach cooking classes. This place is as much yours as it is ours." Gregory felt a lump rise in his throat. He had never expected such an offer, and the generosity behind it touched him deeply. "I'd love that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'd love to be a part of it in any way I can." Robert clapped him on the shoulder. "Welcome home, Greg." And at that moment, Gregory knew that he had found something far more valuable than ownership. He had found a place where he truly belonged, surrounded by people who saw him not as the exclusive, distant restaurateur he had once been, but as a friend, a mentor, and a member of their family. The night ended not with an air of finality, but with a promise of new beginnings. The journey of Le Dîner Nouveau was just beginning, and Gregory was finally ready to be a part of it, wherever it led. The days following the grand reopening were some of the happiest Gregory had experienced in years. He threw himself into his new role with enthusiasm, feeling invigorated by the opportunity to contribute to the restaurant's evolving story. Every morning, he arrived early, working alongside the staff to prepare for the day. Some days he taught cooking classes, and other times, he hosted special events that brought in curious patrons eager to learn from the legend behind the legacy. One evening, as he was preparing a cooking demonstration on the art of making the perfect soufflé, a familiar face walked through the door. It was Charles, the investor who had once pressured Gregory to sell the restaurant. He looked around, his eyes taking in the new decor and the lively crowd. His expression was hard to read, somewhere between curiosity and unease. "Charles," Gregory greeted, setting down his utensils. "I didn't expect to see you here." Charles smiled, but it was a hesitant smile, as if he were stepping into unfamiliar territory. "Greg, I heard a lot of buzz about the reopening. I had to see it for myself." Gregory nodded, feeling a mixture of emotions. Charles had been a significant part of his past, but seeing him here felt like an intersection of the old and the new. "It's different now, isn't it?" Charles scanned the room, his eyes lingering on the diverse crowd of patrons, the friendly chatter, and the warmth that filled every corner of the restaurant. "Very different," he admitted. "I have to say, I wasn't sure you'd still be here after the sale," Gregory chuckled. "Neither did I. But Robert and Lila made me see that there's more to this place than ownership. It's about connection, community, and well, I've found my place." Charles looked surprised, but there was a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "I have to hand it to you, Greg. You've always had a way of reinventing yourself. It's impressive." Gregory felt a genuine smile spread across his face. "I didn't do it alone. Sometimes it takes letting go of control to really grow." He motioned for Charles to take a seat at the counter. "Why don't you stay for the demonstration? I think you'll enjoy it."
Charles hesitated, but eventually nodded, taking a seat among the crowd gathered to watch. As Gregory started the demonstration, his hands moved with the confidence of years of experience, but his heart felt lighter than ever. He explained the intricacies of making a soufflé, his voice filled with both passion and humor, and the crowd responded with enthusiasm, hanging on to his every word. As the soufflés rose in the oven, Gregory shared a story from the early days of Le Dîner Étoilé, recounting a time when he had nearly ruined a VIP's dinner by accidentally using salt instead of sugar. The audience laughed, and Gregory could see the look of surprise on Charles's face. Perhaps he had never imagined Gregory sharing such vulnerabilities with the crowd. When the soufflés were done, the audience cheered, and Gregory felt a warmth spread through him. He handed out samples, watching as people tasted the delicate dessert, their faces lighting up with joy. Charles took a bite, nodding appreciatively. "Still the best in the city, Greg." Gregory laughed, feeling a camaraderie he hadn't felt in a long time. "I've learned a few things since the old days, Charles." As the evening continued, Gregory noticed Robert and Lila standing in the back of the room, observing the demonstration. Their smiles were filled with pride, and when their eyes met his, Gregory felt an unspoken bond, a recognition of how far they had all come. It was a moment of quiet validation, one that reminded him that while he had once feared the loss of his legacy, he had gained so much more in return. The days passed, and Gregory's involvement in Le Dîner Nouveau grew deeper. He and Miguel began experimenting with new recipes, blending traditional French techniques with flavors from around the world. Robert and Lila encouraged him to explore his creativity, and Gregory felt as though he had discovered a whole new side to cooking, one that wasn't about impressing critics, but about celebrating flavors and experiences that could bring people together. But one day, a ripple of surprise ran through the restaurant. An unexpected visitor arrived, a renowned food critic named Evelyn Cartwright, whose reviews could make or break a restaurant's reputation. Gregory had dealt with her years ago when she had reviewed Le Dîner Étoilé, praising the food but criticizing the lack of warmth in the dining experience. Her review had stung back then, and now, seeing her walk through the doors of Le Dîner Nouveau, he felt a familiar pang of anxiety. Evelyn, elegant and sharp-eyed, was seated by Emily at one of the best tables in the house. Gregory watched as Robert and Lila greeted her with their usual grace, making her feel welcome. But he couldn't shake the feeling that her visit would be a test, not just for the restaurant but for him personally.
As the kitchen prepared Evelyn's meal, Gregory felt the familiar tension of wanting everything to be perfect. He worked closely with Miguel, ensuring that every dish was flawless. But as he plated the final course, he paused, a thought crossing his mind. "Something wrong, Greg?" Miguel asked, noticing his hesitation. Gregory took a deep breath. "It's just, I want her to feel the heart of this place, not just the technique. What if we sent her a little surprise?" Miguel raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" A smile tugged at the corner of Gregory's lips. "An amuse-bouche, something simple but full of flavor, and I'll serve it myself." Minutes later, Gregory emerged from the kitchen with a small plate of fresh-baked gougères, a classic French cheese puff he had perfected years ago. But this time, he had added a twist, using a blend of aged cheddar and a hint of truffle, giving it a modern touch. As he approached Evelyn's table, he felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. She looked up, her eyes briefly registering surprise. "Gregory Palmer, serving the food himself. I must say, I wasn't expecting this." Gregory smiled warmly. "I've learned that sometimes, the best way to connect with guests is to do it personally. This is a little something we've added, gougères with a twist. I hope you enjoy it." Evelyn's expression softened as she took a bite, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, a smile, a genuine approving smile, spread across her face. "It's exquisite," she said, her tone lightening. "And, I must say, the atmosphere here is entirely different from what I remember." Gregory felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "It's all thanks to Robert and Lila. They've created something special here." Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. "It shows. I can feel the heart of the place." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "It's good to see you embracing it, Greg. This place has grown into something wonderful, and it's clear you've played a big part in that." As he walked back to the kitchen, Gregory felt an unexpected surge of emotion. For years, he had tried to impress critics like Evelyn with perfection, but it was only now, by embracing warmth and connection, that he had finally won her approval. It was a moment of triumph, but more importantly, it was a moment of clarity. He was no longer the man he used to be. Later that evening, Robert, Lila, and Gregory gathered in the kitchen after the last guests had left. They shared a bottle of wine, toasting to a successful evening. "Evelyn loved everything," Lila said, raising her glass, "and she's planning to write a feature on how Le Dîner Nouveau has transformed." Gregory grinned, clinking his glass with theirs. "To new beginnings," he said. Robert laughed. "And to all of us for making it happen." The night ended on a high note, and as Gregory made his way home, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. But the story didn't end there. In the following weeks, Le Dîner Nouveau gained even more attention, with guests lining up to experience the new and improved dining experience. Gregory found himself busier than ever, but in a way that felt joyful rather than burdensome. The restaurant was alive, a hub of creativity and community, and he was at the heart of it. One afternoon, as he prepared for another cooking class, he received a letter. It was written on elegant stationery, with a seal he didn't recognize. Curious, he opened it and began to read. The letter was from a prestigious culinary academy, offering him a position as a guest instructor to teach courses on classic French cuisine and modern fusion techniques. Gregory's eyes widened. It was an opportunity he had dreamed of for years but had never pursued, too consumed by his restaurant. And now, the chance was being presented to him, at a time when he was rediscovering his passion for cooking. He shared the news with Robert and Lila that evening. They were thrilled for him, but there was a moment of hesitation in their eyes. "Does this mean you'll be leaving us?" Robert asked. Gregory felt the weight of the decision. "Not entirely. I've found a home here, and I don't want to give that up. But maybe I can do both. Teach during the day and still be part of Le Dîner Nouveau in the evenings." Lila smiled. "We wouldn't have it any other way." The decision was made, and as Gregory prepared for this next chapter, he knew that life would continue to bring surprises and challenges. But for the first time, he felt ready to face them, knowing that he was part of something bigger than himself, something he had helped build, but that had grown beyond his wildest dreams. And with that, Gregory realized that the journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. Gregory embraced his new role as a culinary instructor with the same passion he had brought to his restaurant career. Each morning, he headed to the prestigious academy, excited to teach young, aspiring chefs the techniques he had spent a lifetime perfecting. Watching their eyes light up as they mastered a new skill or crafted a dish that tasted better than they imagined was an experience that filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. But his evenings at Le Dîner Nouveau remained the highlight of his days. The dual roles as both a teacher and a part of the restaurant family felt like the perfect balance. He spent his nights collaborating with Miguel, experimenting with new fusion dishes that reflected his journey of blending tradition and innovation. One Friday night, as Gregory was preparing for the evening rush, Robert approached him with a grin on his face. "Greg, I think tonight's going to be special." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "Special how?" Before Robert could answer, the kitchen door swung open, and in walked a man Gregory hadn't seen in years, his estranged brother, Daniel. Gregory's hands stilled as he locked eyes with him, a flood of emotions washing over him. They hadn't spoken in over a decade, ever since a falling out over the family's restaurant business. Daniel had gone his own way, opening his own successful bistro on the other side of the city. The silence between them had been heavy, filled with unresolved tension and unspoken words. "Daniel," Gregory breathed, feeling a mix of surprise and unease. "What are you doing here?" Daniel gave a hesitant smile, his eyes searching Gregory's. "I heard about the reopening, and I heard you were involved. I thought it was about time we talked." Robert, sensing the need for privacy, gave Gregory an encouraging nod before retreating to the dining room, leaving the two brothers alone. Gregory could feel his heart racing, the old wounds of their past bubbling up, but he also felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the opportunity he hadn't known he needed. "Look, I know it's been a long time," Daniel started, rubbing the back of his neck, a nervous habit Gregory recognized. "And I know I wasn't exactly supportive when you decided to branch out on your own." Gregory felt his defenses rising, but he pushed them down, reminding himself of the lessons he had learned recently. "We both made mistakes," he said quietly, "and we both let our pride get in the way." Daniel nodded, relief flashing across his face. "I was wrong, Greg. I thought the only way to prove myself was to compete with you, and it drove us apart. But seeing what you've done here, I realized I want us to rebuild what we lost." Gregory's throat tightened, the emotions he had buried for years now surfacing. It's not about competition, Daniel. Not anymore. I've learned that building something together, as a community, as a family, is more important than any solo success. Daniel's eyes softened and he extended his hand. What do you say, Greg? Can we start over? Gregory hesitated for only a moment before taking his brother's hand, feeling the weight of the past finally lifting. I'd like that a lot. The two of them embraced, and as they pulled back, Gregory's eyes brightened with an idea. How about you join us tonight in the kitchen? It's been a while since we cooked together, but I'd love for you to see what we're doing here. Daniel's face lit up. I'd be honored. The night turned into a celebration not just of food but of reconciliation. The brothers worked side by side, rediscovering the rhythm they had once shared in the kitchen. Miguel, Robert, and Lila watched with smiles as the two men prepared dishes that blended their distinct styles, Gregory's classic French techniques and Daniel's modern flair. The kitchen buzzed with energy, a blend of excitement and joy, as the two brothers created something new together. As the dishes went out, the dining room came alive with praise and excitement. Patrons were delighted by the unique collaboration, and the atmosphere felt electric. Gregory, glancing over at Daniel as they worked, felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known he was missing. Reconnecting with his brother felt like the final piece falling into place, the last step in letting go of the past and fully embracing the future. Later that evening, after the last dish was served and the kitchen began to quiet down, Robert and Lila gathered everyone, staff and guests alike, for an impromptu celebration. Tonight was more than just another service, Lila announced, raising her glass. Tonight, we saw something special. We saw family come together, and we saw the magic that happens when people open their hearts. Miguel, always one to lighten the mood, chimed in with a grin. And, for the record, the food was outstanding. Laughter and applause filled the room, and Gregory felt tears welling up in his eyes. This was a night he would never forget. As the crowd toasted, he and Daniel exchanged a look that spoke of hope and new beginnings. But just as the evening seemed to reach its peak, a commotion erupted at the entrance. The door swung open, and in walked a tall woman with striking features. She wore a confident smile, and her presence commanded attention. Gregory's eyes widened. He recognized her instantly. It was Sofia Martinez, a former chef he had mentored years ago, now one of the most acclaimed chefs in the country. She had been known for her daring flavors and innovative techniques, and her restaurants had earned numerous awards. They hadn't seen each other in years, and her arrival was both surprising and thrilling. "Sofia?" Gregory called out, making his way through the crowd. "What are you doing here?" Sofia's eyes lit up when she saw him. "Greg, I've been hearing rumors about the magic happening at Le Dîner Nouveau, and I had to see it for myself. You've got the culinary world buzzing." Gregory laughed, feeling a swell of pride. "Well, I can't take all the credit. It's a team effort, and I'm just lucky to be a part of it." Sofia gave him a knowing smile. Always the modest one. She glanced around, taking in the atmosphere. "But seriously, Greg, this place, it's special, and I was wondering if you'd be open to a collaboration." Gregory's eyes widened. "A collaboration?" Sofia nodded enthusiastically. "I'm working on a new concept, a series of pop-up events across the country, blending different culinary traditions. I'd love for you, Robert, and Lila to join me. We could showcase Le Dîner Nouveau's unique approach to fusion cuisine." Robert and Lila, who had been listening nearby, exchanged excited glances. "That sounds incredible," Lila exclaimed. "We've always dreamed of taking our vision beyond these walls." Gregory felt the excitement bubbling up. "Sofia, this sounds amazing, and it would be an honor to be part of something like that." Sofia grinned. "Perfect. We'll make it an event to remember. Le Dîner Nouveau on the road, spreading the love and the flavors we've all come to cherish." As they discussed the details, Gregory realized that life had a way of coming full circle. The journey of rebuilding and opening his heart to change had led him to opportunities he could have never imagined. The past, once filled with bitterness and pride, was transforming into a rich tapestry of connections, friendships, and new beginnings. As the night ended, and the plans for the pop-up events solidified, Gregory stood with his team, his family, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Life had taken unexpected turns, but each one had led him to this moment. surrounded by people who shared his passion and vision. The story of Le Dîner Nouveau was expanding beyond the walls of the restaurant, and Gregory was ready to take the next step, knowing that no matter where it led, it would be filled with flavor, friendship, and the warmth of a community that had become his home. As the plans for the pop-up events began to unfold, the excitement within Le Dîner Nouveau reached a fever pitch. Robert, Lila, Miguel, and Gregory threw themselves into preparation, experimenting with new dishes that would represent the fusion of their collective culinary backgrounds. Each night, they stayed late, laughing, tasting, and perfecting the menu, the anticipation of taking their work beyond the restaurant's walls growing with every bite. The first pop-up event was set to take place in Los Angeles, a city known for its diverse food scene and culinary innovation. Sophia's connections in the city ensured that they had a prime location in an iconic rooftop venue overlooking the skyline. The team flew out together, filled with a mix of excitement and nerves. On the evening of the event, Gregory found himself standing on the rooftop, looking out at the glowing city lights. The view was breathtaking, and the air buzzed with anticipation. People had started to fill the space, and there was an electric energy as the night took shape. He spotted familiar faces, food critics, influencers, and even some celebrities, all gathered to experience Le Dîner Nouveau's signature style. Gregory, standing next to Robert and Lila, felt the weight of the moment. "This is bigger than anything I ever imagined," he admitted, his eyes scanning the room. Lila squeezed his arm. "And it's only the beginning. We're just getting started."
The event kicked off with an introduction from Sophia, who welcomed everyone and spoke about the vision behind the collaboration. "Tonight," she announced, her voice clear and confident, "we bring you the heart and soul of Le Dîner Nouveau, a place where tradition meets innovation, and where the food is only part of the story. It's about community, family, and finding a place where everyone belongs." The crowd erupted in applause, and Gregory felt his heart swell with pride. It was a celebration not just of their culinary achievements, but of the journey they had all taken together. As the night unfolded, dishes flew out of the kitchen. Fusion plates that combined French classics with Latin, Asian, and Mediterranean influences, each one crafted with a personal touch from the chefs who had become his family. Midway through the evening, as the guests indulged in the rich flavors, Gregory noticed a familiar face moving through the crowd. It was Evelyn Cartwright, the critic who had recently reviewed Le Dîner Nouveau. She caught his eye and gave him a nod, her expression unreadable. Gregory felt a familiar pang of nervousness, but he reminded himself that this was a new chapter. He had nothing to prove, only a story to share. Taking a deep breath, he approached her. "Evelyn, it's good to see you again." Evelyn smiled, her eyes flickering with curiosity. "I have to admit, Greg, you've surprised me. The restaurant, the pop-up. It's a bold move." Gregory laughed lightly. "Bold is a good word for it. We're trying to bring the heart of Le Dîner Nouveau to new places, to show that our story is just as important as the food." Evelyn nodded thoughtfully, glancing at the dishes coming out of the kitchen. "You've managed to do something I rarely see. You've created an experience that feels personal, that feels genuine." Gregory felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Evelyn. That means a lot, coming from you." She paused for a moment, then leaned in slightly, her tone softer. "I know it hasn't been easy for you, Greg. I remember your early days, how rigid everything was, how focused you were on perfection. But seeing you here, seeing what you've built, it's inspiring. You've evolved." For a moment, Gregory felt his throat tighten. It was rare for someone like Evelyn to offer such heartfelt praise, and he knew how much weight her words carried. "It's been a journey," he admitted, "but I've learned that letting go of control, of pride, it opens doors I never imagined." Evelyn's expression softened. "It shows." She raised her glass. "To evolution, and to more surprises." As they clinked glasses, Gregory felt a surge of confidence. The night was proving to be a success, and for the first time he felt fully in the moment, not worried about perfection, but grateful for the experience.
But the evening was far from over. Just as the final course was being served, a delicate lavender and yuzu tart that had become a signature dessert, an unexpected guest arrived. The crowd parted as a tall, elderly man with a dignified presence entered. Gregory's eyes widened. It was Jacques Lafontaine, a legendary chef who had been Gregory's mentor when he first started in the culinary world. Jacques was a towering figure in the industry, and his approval was considered the gold standard. Gregory's heart pounded. He hadn't seen Jacques in years, not since they had parted ways over creative differences. Jacques had always pushed Gregory to embrace more warmth and flexibility in his cooking, but back then, Gregory's stubborn pursuit of perfection had led them to drift apart. Jacques approached, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the crowd, the dishes, the energy of the evening. When his eyes finally settled on Gregory, he offered a slow, approving nod. "Gregory," he said, his voice carrying its usual gravitas, "it seems you've finally found what you were searching for." Gregory felt a lump in his throat. "Jacques, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure if you'd ever." Jacques held up a hand, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I came because I heard whispers of something remarkable happening, and I must say you've exceeded my expectations." Gregory felt a wave of emotion, memories of his early years flooding back, of long nights in Jacques' kitchen, the lessons, the tough love, the push to be better. "I wouldn't be here without your guidance," he admitted, his voice thick with gratitude. "I was so focused on being the best that I forgot why I loved cooking in the first place." Jacques' eyes softened. "And now you found it. Cooking is not just about technique, Gregory. It's about heart. It's about people. Tonight, you've shown that you understand that." The two men shared a long, meaningful handshake, the kind that spoke of respect, of reconciliation, and of unspoken gratitude. Gregory felt the final pieces of his past click into place, the last shadows of his old self fading away. The night continued with an energy that seemed almost magical. The rooftop sparkled under the city lights, and the guests, inspired by the food and the story behind it, mingled with laughter and conversation. Gregory moved from table to table, sharing stories, serving dishes, and feeling the thrill of connection he had once shunned. Near the end of the night, as the crowd began to thin out, Robert, Lila, and Sophia joined Gregory at the bar, where they watched the final guests depart. "That was incredible," Lila said, leaning against the counter with a tired but happy smile. Sophia grinned. "We've set the bar high for the next pop-up. I can't wait to see where we take this." Gregory, holding a glass of champagne, toasted them all. "To the team," he said, his voice filled with warmth, "to family, to friends, and to the journey." As they clinked glasses, a young server approached with an envelope in hand. "Gregory, this was left for you." Curious, Gregory opened the envelope to find a letter. It was an invitation to a prestigious international culinary festival in Paris, requesting Le Dîner Nouveau to showcase their story and their unique approach to fusion cuisine. Gregory's eyes widened as he read the details. It was an opportunity of a lifetime, one that could bring their restaurant's vision to the world stage. He looked up at Robert, Lila, and Sophia, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "What do you all say? Paris?" Robert let out a whoop of joy. "Let's do it." Lila's eyes danced with excitement. "Paris will never know what hit it." Sophia, always one for adventure, grinned. "I say we bring everything we've got." As they planned their next move, Gregory felt an exhilaration he hadn't felt in years. The story of Le Dîner Nouveau was growing beyond anything he had imagined, and he knew that with his team, his family, by his side, there was no limit to where their journey could take them. The night ended with the promise of Paris on the horizon, and Gregory, standing under the stars, felt the thrill of a life that was no longer confined to a single space but was open to the world. The adventure had only just begun. As the lights of Los Angeles twinkled below and the final guests disappeared into the night, Gregory, Robert, Lila, and Sophia huddled together, the Paris invitation lying between them like a treasure map waiting to be explored. They laughed, strategized, and imagined the possibilities of what lay ahead. The idea of showcasing Le Dîner Nouveau on an international stage was exhilarating, but the challenge was daunting, one that would push them beyond anything they had ever done. Miguel joined the circle, his eyes bright with excitement. "Paris, huh? We're going to need to pull out all the stops for this one." Sophia nodded, her eyes glinting with determination. "We'll need to come up with dishes that not only represent the restaurant but tell the story of how we got here. Every bite needs to be a journey." Lila grinned. "And we'll make it a spectacle. show them what it means to blend tradition with innovation, to embrace family and friendship. But amidst the excitement, Gregory felt a familiar thrill, the kind that comes before an adventure. His eyes scanned the horizon, and for a moment he thought about all the hurdles they would face. Different cultures, the pressure of impressing some of the world's top chefs, the possibility of old rivals emerging to challenge their vision. As the group dispersed for the night, planning and ideas buzzing in their minds, Gregory stayed behind on the rooftop. The Paris invitation fluttered in the evening breeze, a promise of everything he had once dreamed of, but with a twist he had never imagined. And then in the quiet, a thought crossed his mind. What if this journey wasn't just about Paris? What if it was about pushing the limits of what Le Dîner Nouveau could become? A global movement that brought people together through food, a community that reached beyond borders. But the uncertainty loomed. Gregory knew that taking on this challenge would mean confronting new obstacles, facing his past, and testing every bond he had built. It was a chance to prove that they could thrive not just in their city, but on the world stage. But what if things didn't go as planned? What if the pressure proved too much, or the allure of fame and fortune tore them apart? He stared out at the city lights, feeling the thrill of the unknown and the weight of what lay ahead. A smile tugged at his lips. He had no idea what the future held, but he was ready for it. With a deep breath, Gregory whispered into the night, "Here we go, Paris. Let's see where this road takes us." As the camera pulled away from the rooftop, capturing the glow of the city and the promise of the journey to come, one thing was clear. Le Dîner Nouveau's story was far from over. It was only just beginning, and the world would be watching.